Welcome back to Woman Conversations in Black and White. I'm Bernadette.
And I'm Linda, and we have chosen to film our conversations about sensitive topics across racial lines in the hopes that our listeners will learn from it, but also in the hopes that some of you will take this on and start having these conversations on your own as well.
Mhm.
So tonight's topic is something that came up in our own earlier discussions before we were filming. It's making space for white grief and mourning the
Mhm.
dream of what we thought America was.
Yes. hmm
So we're going to talk about it, but Bernadette suggested I take some lead on this. And I'll tell you when I first became aware of this. Of course, I've watched civil rights activity, I've seen all these things for many decades, but George Floyd's death combined with the pandemic, when people were feeling different and watching things differently, really hit many of us hard in the white community as well. It wasn't only the black community, it was the white community. And I knew it was huge and I could feel it in my heart. I just wanted to do something to make things better, but I had no clue as to what. So, as we began to talk, and those are in some of our early videos, if you want to go back, those are some of the first videos we recorded in the
hmm
series. But after Bernadette and her family and me and my family talked and had these conversations, I found that I was just dealing with a shock wave of reality as it really was. Just, it was hitting me. And I've always believed as a native born American that America was, I'm sure it's not perfect, but always better
hmm
than any place else in the world to live. And to come face to face with history, little bits of history that I began to get trickling in, and our conversations about what Bernadette and her family experienced daily or weekly in the face of racism in their faces and the threat of danger to them, everything. It's just like I couldn't reconcile. This is the best country in the world. But here, my friend and neighbor is experiencing this regularly.
hmm
And it's like, this does not compute. Now, I'm sure that what a lot of white people have done over the decades is, well, that hardly ever happens, or, well, racism is better than it used to be, or, well, that's not my problem. There's nothing I can do. There's 1,000 ways you can rationalize it away, but I was not able to rationalize it away. It just was painful to me to acknowledge that the realities of how America as an institution has treated Black people. And I know it's a different topic, but it goes the same for Indigenous people,
hmm
for many other people of color. So we won't detour off there, but I am acknowledging that all of that is true as well. Just extremely painful. And like, what does the dream mean? Was it all hollow in the beginning? Was it never meant to be that way? And finally, I found some comfort after a while. I actually cried about it some. I talked to a couple of people. I cried. Bernadette and I acknowledged that this was going on for me too.
hmm
And I found comfort in Langston Hughes' poem, As a Black Man. And I
hmm
really read that and I saved it and I looked at it. He ends this incredible poem.
hmm
Bernadette, what is the name of that poem? Can you remember?
No, but I know exactly which one you're talking about. It speaks of the dream of America and that we can still
It's
get
it's
there.
like
hmm
that. It's Langston
hmm
Hughes, The Dream of America, but that may
hmm
not be the right title.
Right.
But
hmm
he ends by saying the America that never was, but
Right.
still can be.
hmm
That was very emotional for me. Like, a Black man said, it's never been this way, but that doesn't mean the vision and the dream meant nothing. It means we've still got work to do. And I found that really heartening. It didn't mean that everything was a sham. It didn't mean that nothing good ever happened, but it meant we need to look at this big um, shame this big unhealed part, this big still current
Hmm.
pain, and we need to find remedies to change that. So that was my experience. And Bernadette, I'm talking a long time here. I don't mean to do that. What would you like
Oh
to put?
no, you're fine. You and I had hosted. I think it was one of our first conversations we had hosted, and it was open to some people in the community. And one of the ladies who was on the call, she was speaking about some of the awarenesses that you were coming to as well. And I could hear the grief in her voice. Now, to be honest, I am a counselor, so I listen for things a bit differently than most do. So I could hear the grief in her voice, and I acknowledged that, but she did not feel like she had the right to have her grief, white grief, in my presence. And I'm not saying that white people necessarily do. It is not Black people's burden to bear white grief, but I do know that there needs to be space for it somewhere.
Mhm.
Because for a lot of, as you call yourself, well-meaning white folk, their whole reality that they thought the nation was has crumbled in many places. And that is a heartbreaking realization to come to. And people need to have space to be able to grieve that loss before you can begin the new dream of what America can be. And before you can begin fighting for that dream, you have to be able to grieve that loss. Mhm.
Right. Yeah. And I didn't have to have a Black friend to do this, but
Mhm.
knowing that she knew that it was real for me actually
Mhm.
helped. We haven't
Mhm.
talked at length about it. This is probably the longest conversation we've had, but we have acknowledged it before.
Mhm.
And if you're thinking about, well, how do I deal with that myself? One thing that is helpful is to deal with this acknowledgement, this grief, this
Mhm.
deepening awareness in the company of other white people, people who
Mhm.
identify as white,
Mhm.
because they're going to have similar backgrounds, similar experiences on this level.
Mhm.
And if you have Black friends, don't expect them to acknowledge it or comfort you. That's not
Mhm.
their job. But
No,
it
it's
is
not.
nice if someone can. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, but I spoke to you because there was one night you had said, this was not the America I was raised to believe it was. And I could hear the grief in your voice. That was the first time I had thought of, wow, this must really be painful for white people. Because see, our reality has never been that. So our grief has always been from at the expense of America. And so I had myself, probably more many Black people, recognize that this is truly a grieving process for lots of white people. This is truly a grieving process,
Right.
and that this is painful, and that it needs to have space to be discussed and to run its cycle. But yes, this is a loss. And I would have never had that thought because I've never looked at it from that advantage. Yeah, I've never looked at it from that perspective.
Another one of the blessings of talking to each other.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and for any of our listeners who've done any sort of recovery work, from whether from addiction or
Right.
codependency or something,
Mm-hmm.
you probably will recognize the realities of when a family has a severe dysfunction or someone has a chemical addiction. It's very common for the other people in the family not to admit that, not to want that to be the case.
Mm-hmm.
And depending upon the situation, people can go through a lot of acrobatics to avoid acknowledging what is real.
Like
And
breaking into the Capitol.
yes, yes, exactly. We don't want to acknowledge what is real,
Mm-hmm.
so we're going to make it go away. We're going to pretend
Uh-huh.
like it's not so, and so forth. And whether it's something, um, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging something that you don't want to be true is a big hurdle. And for
Yeah.
some people more than others. But if I didn't want my dream of America to be um, awakened from, to be shattered, then I would have had to say, well, but Bernadette, that, look at this situation and look at that situation. And our friendship would have ended there because
Yeah.
I would not have had the capacity to see what was real outside of my own little circle, my own shoes, my own worldview. So to stretch yourself and to find ways to see from someone else's point of view is a powerful thing. And it requires some stamina, and it requires some fortitude, and it requires the possibility that some of the illusions that you held dear will be crumbled. And I'm back to where I believe in America again, but I believe that I don't know. I don't even have words. Anyway, there's plenty of crimes in the background of the entire system, and to find our way through. I happen to be alive at this time and healthy and creative, and I want to help us make it through that. But to do that, we have to acknowledge what has happened and what's gone on from slavery to racism to lynchings to genocide of the native peoples to just one after another, and we have to find space to hold that in our heart and cry if we need to cry over what we thought was perfect, and it's not perfect, but it's still what we have. It's our country,
and we can play an active role in making it better.
right?
Yeah.
If we take that original dream, like Langston Hughes said,
Yes.
we take that original dream, the America that never was but still can be, and do our part to make it come alive and become just and equal, like the founders stated in their beginning, in their first things. Well, I don't know that I have anything else to say on that. Do you have any other comments you want to make before we end?
No, I don't, but I'm glad that we had this conversation, because this is not a subject that I have heard spoken about in I guess public media or mainstream media or any mainstream avenue. But I think it is something that needs to be said, and I think it is a space that needs to be made in order for all of us to move forward and create the America that it can be.
Right.
So I'm glad. So even if you and I are starting this conversation, I'm glad we're starting this conversation, and we encourage you all to start these conversations in your life. These are hard, as we say, but we do these on purpose, with a purpose. So please share these in your circles, have these conversations, rate, comment, subscribe. We're Bernadette and Linda on YouTube, all together, like a hashtag feed. And so we thank you for taking the time to sit with us today to listen to our conversations, and we hope that you'll start these conversations in your life. So start talking and keep talking, and we'll see you next week.